Okay, it's 6:35 now, so let's get going. Welcome everyone to the Walk Ride Greater Manchester winter meeting, the second one that we've done in the modern style, online, as much as these days. And it's also our second anniversary. It was December 2018 that some of you, I'm sure, joined us in the Friends Meeting House to see if there was any value in forming a new campaign around walking and cycling. And here we are 2 years on. So thank you to everyone who joined us then and everyone who's joined us along the way. So just a little tiny bit of housekeeping. Could we ask everybody who isn't a speaker this evening to turn off their video, because that reduces the bandwidth and just makes things run a little smoother. So because there are so many of us, we have muted everyone by default, and we therefore request you, if you have any comments or any questions, just please pop them in the chat. One of our number will be monitoring that throughout the meeting. So in terms of the structure of the evening, we have 4 guest speakers, as well as the regular slot from Boardman. So we've got Mary Cray from Living Streets, Atchara Khonglim from Tameside, and Holmes from Cycling UK, who will be giving a presentation kind of together. We've got Jon Burke from Hackney Council. But before we hear from our guest speakers, I'm going to hand over to Claire from Walk Ride Greater Manchester for a roundup of the Walk Ride Greater Manchester year in this rather extraordinary year that we call 2020. So over to you, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm just going to pick out a few headlines just for a couple of minutes and also look ahead. And I am wearing the natty jacket that I wore 2 years ago, even though I'm here in my bedroom. You know, never mind COVID, we need to like carry on dressing up. So yeah, we made it through COVID, and it definitely affected Walk Ride. You know, I think some groups have, you know, not necessarily been meeting, but actually it's actually been a bonus for a lot of the Walk Ride groups and individuals. Online has brought us closer. People haven't had to make meetings. And of course, walking and cycling has shot up the agenda nationally and locally. And Walk Ride supporters and the wider network has been really active in setting the agenda around this and engaging with politicians and officers in their local areas. And I think, you know, that's taken a lot of time and energy from people. It's been really, really well received and effective. I think that the last meeting we had physically face-to-face in March, we decided we were going to set a whole load of new campaign goals. And of course, they went out the window completely with COVID. And most of our focus has been on engaging around 2 things. One, the emergency funding, now not called emergency funding, but just funding. And also the community engagement. You know, how can we help advocate for moving away from driving as a default and supporting walking and cycling. So I think a few things that we can now say is that, you know, Walk Ride is now kind of credible and valued network of advocates across Greater Manchester with both a local and national reputation. We support walking and cycling, but we also support each other, and that's been a big role through COVID. We see, I guess, our main role as holding councils to account, but as a critical friend, and not doing that in a, you know, we are part of the solution, they are part of the solution. We have made some steps forward with Walk Ride this year. We constituted as a community interest company, and that has allowed us to hold funding and bid for funding. And we talked at the last meeting about the lottery project that we've been able to deliver in Chorlton next year. We're part of a partnership doing that, and that's enabled us to employ our first employee, which is quite a groundbreaking thing. And we've also begun to build wider relationships across the network in Greater Manchester. So we engaged with public health directors this year on the Active Travel Manifesto that's been created in the public health sector. And we continue to help get and tell the story in various media outlets in the MEN, BBC, ITV, podcasts. We speak on panels and webinars. We've launched our Facebook group, which if you're not a member of, encourage you to join. If you're an advocate, that's a place to share. And also our monthly newsletter, which you can find, if someone could paste the link to that in the chats, on our website. It goes out monthly, full source of news. And we've also seen some of the local groups, walk ride groups that bid for B Network funding. Those schemes have actually started to come in on the ground now. So Romilly and Heaton's in Stockport. And we continue to be critical friends there too. You know, we will continue to push for the best schemes that we possibly can. But we've also been working on diversity, equality and inclusion, which is really important for the walking and cycling kind of sector to embrace. A great example of that is our trike crowdfunder that Harry, who introduced us today and is part of our steering group, has led on. And this is a move to enable, we want to raise money to buy 2 e-trikes that we will effectively loan out to disabled people in Greater Manchester for a long period, for them to try out that, to coin Chris Boardman's phrase, to try before they buy. Because if you're not a disabled person, a bike is cheap, but if you have if you are disabled, then that's quite a big investment. So our scheme will enable people to try things out. And thank you to everyone who's donated to that. You know, we raised over £1,000 in 24 hours, and we've now, that total is now £10,000. Half of that money comes from M&S to a match funding. The other half has been raised by people who care about this agenda, and it's a fantastic testament to Harry and the people who've donated, and to Walk Ride. And that funding is still open, so if you would like to donate, that there is time to do that. We have enough for 2 trikes, but there's stuff to fund around that, buddy rides and kit for the bikes and stuff like that. And then just looking ahead, I just wanted to pick out 3 things. The first one is political will. Basically, you know, walking and cycling, the things that we know need to happen won't happen without political will, and May is a big moment for that. We've got the local elections and the mayoral elections, and Walk Ride will be working really hard to make sure that this is right up the top of that agenda, working on an active travel manifesto and wanting to get commitments from our politicians. The second thing is collaboration. With no one agency or group holds the solution to the challenge of moving 1 million people a day out of their cars and into active travel, and that's what we need to do over the next 10 years. And we need all the agencies to work together on that, whether that is TFGM, whether that is GM Moving, Living Streets, Walk Ride, all the volunteer groups. And there's more to be done to bring those people together to be able to create that solution together, and we'll be working with those groups to help do that. Part of collaboration is communication, and there needs to be a step change in that as well. We've done a survey, the results of which will be in our next newsletter, which really show that people are really lacking knowledge about just what is going on. And we push for a lot more to happen, but actually we're not even communicating the good stuff that is happening well enough. And I know that Chris may talk later about some of the things that are happening on that. And then the third thing is for Walk Ride. We want to carry on our journey, and part of that is going to involve trying to become a fully funded body so that we can support campaigners more readily. So our big thing next year will be exploring avenues to funding to be able to create a role for a paid administrator, for instance, and be able to support what we do on a slightly more formal footing. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. Back to you, Nick, to get into the meat of the meeting, and thanks to everyone who's taken part in a great year.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Claire. So without further ado, our first speaker is Dame Mary Cray. She's the CEO of Living Streets, which is a campaign for better pedestrian provision. She has, I understand, been in post only for a couple of months. And she's going to talk to us about Living Streets' new vocal stance and how we can make more impact as campaigners. So over to you, Mary.
Thanks very much indeed, Nick, and great to listen to Claire there, and thanks for the introduction. I've just done my own sort of mad dash back from the office to join you from my bedroom, and sort of sprang up the stairs, and I've got my dinner sitting at my elbow. So apologies if I turn the camera off when I've done my piece, because I'll be eating some food, but also I will stay and listen to what everyone is saying. I thought I would try and share with you, if I can. Oh, I'm not sure actually. Share screen. Here we go. Maybe I won't. Let me just get my PowerPoints up, because, what I'll do, I think, is just talk about what observations from the first 4 months, my reflections on COVID and how we build back better, and perhaps say a little bit about the climate change report that came out today as well. So first of all, every organisation is now a COVID effective organisation, and Living Streets is no different to that. We've all seen just how quickly our country, our cities and the world can move in order to respond to a global emergency. And with the vaccinations taking place, which kicked off yesterday in my hometown of Coventry, we now see a sort of faint glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, and that's amazing to see. The government talks about building back better, and we are hosting the COP26 Climate Summit next year in Glasgow. And I think this is a really amazing moment for the active travel movement, for walkers, for cyclists, to say, actually, you can move really quickly. We've been talking about this for 30 years, and we've seen what you can do. And we want to bake in some of those improvements, some of those safety improvements, some of that road space reallocation. Now, COVID hasn't affected everybody equally. What it has done is exacerbate and reveal already existing inequalities, which is why it was so interesting to hear Claire talk about your crowdfunding for the tricycles and the inclusive agenda. And what I think is important is that as an organisation, Living Streets' new strategy is about speaking up. So it's about being unafraid to talk to governments, to demand of politicians better streets, safer streets, to scale up what we do. We work very, very effectively. We have projects in Manchester, we have school projects in Manchester and across the Northwest, but we're not present everywhere, and we're not present in every city. We have a network of local groups, not present in every city. So we want to scale up, to speak up, and to really make sure that we stay strong as we go forward over the next 5 years. And you know, we're very pleased to be partnering with organisations like yourself in amplifying our voice on these issues. Now, what have we learnt about? First of all, there is a lot of funding that has been allocated to walking and cycling. And the budget has basically said I think it's £257 million, and we advocated for a revenue capital split, that, you know, a greater spend on revenue rather than capital. So the government likes to do an 80-20 split capital revenue. There's no point building cycleways if you don't give people the confidence and the skills to be able to use them. There's no point, you know, building safer streets and putting in school streets if the old behaviours carry on. So you need to put that behaviour change piece in, and that's what we've got years and years of experience of doing. And what's really encouraging, I think, is to see the growth, the explosion of school streets across the country, and parents who are concerned about the air pollution consequences, the noise, the stress, the arguments. I know from standing at school gates for many years, they weren't always the most tranquil of places, and I often saw the odd bit of argy-bargy at school gates between parents parking illegally on the lines, leaving their vehicles to idle. You know, every child should have the right to go to school safely. Every person should be able to walk on their streets, and that includes people with dementia, that includes older people. Those voices of those people being vaccinated yesterday, they have the right to be out and about, heard in the world, and to exist in and to socialise safely. And we need to think about what decent streets look like for them. You know, they need benches, they need to be dog poo free, but we've got to go beyond the dog poo argument and the leaves argument. We've got to make them safe for boys to go home from school without living in fear of knife crime. So there's a massive agenda here. And I think as we look forward, there has been a lot achieved through the emergency active travel fund that the government put out, the emergency allocations of funding. We've seen a lot of pop-up cycle lanes, a lot of pop-up pavements. Are all of them perfect? No, they're not. But what research has shown is that they are popular. Generally, 2/3 of people support those schemes. And there's a lot of mythologies that have grown up around low traffic neighbourhoods. I think it's a slightly unfortunate turn of phrase. I think maybe we need to brand them as people-friendly streets, as they have in Hackney, or child-friendly streets, because or grandparent-friendly streets as well. So these are, you know, streets where people can walk and cycle and can meet safely, and ideally where there's a 20-mile-an-hour speed imposed there as well. So we want to be able to make sure that those school streets are rolled out, that those low traffic neighbourhoods are rolled out. But obviously, what I think is unfortunate is that some of those neighbourhoods and some of those plans have attracted controversy. And I always get a bit worried when I see Nigel Farage saying he's going to be standing councillors at the next council elections from his whatever party it is that he's now in charge of. I'm sure Nigel Farage is going to be in charge of a political party for as long as for someone who hates politicians, he certainly seems to love politics, but also the sort of divisive politics which amplifies people's divisions. And I would hope that after the shared experience that we've all been through with COVID, part of the building back better would be about listening and speaking to each other in a more neighbourly, conciliatory and friendly way. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to have those conversations in a considered and considerate way. We have produced, along with the Walking and Cycling Alliance, a sort of a myth-busting document, which I'll post in the chat afterwards, which just gives, well, we sent it out through the local government association to give councillors, and we've sent it to MPs, some comfort about what it is that they're doing. I remember as a young councillor, well, I still feel quite young, but probably not for many of you, sitting in a school hall introducing the first controlled parking zone in Islington back in 1999. And it was the end of the world as we knew it, to be able to propose a scheme around the tube stations where people were going to have to pay £35 a year to park outside their own home. And yet, as soon as it was introduced, the commuter parking disappeared. It tended to go into the next door streets, who then immediately demanded a controlled parking zone. And we ended up reallocating that road space back to the residents and their vehicles. But what we have seen is a huge growth with sat-navs, Google Maps, Waze, etc., of vehicles using our back streets as rat runs. And I think that is deeply, deeply unfortunate. And we know in our cities, this is contributing to the twin epidemics that we have of air pollution, but we also have an epidemic of obesity. And if we're going to tackle those epidemics, we need to start by getting people out of their cars for those short local journeys. There's a lot of controversy in London at the moment around Ealing, but 1 in 10 journeys in Ealing is under a kilometre. And that's, you know, it's ridiculous, and for people to take their cars on such short trips. So what the low traffic neighbourhoods, people friendly streets do is create the space which says, actually, by the time you've gone round the long way to do this, and the rat runs are closed, it's actually quicker for you to walk or cycle. And as someone who took walked, cycle and ran up the hill with my 2 children for the last 13 years, I would often cycle, they would run. I mean, I always say to them, that's why they're so fit, because we were often late. This is how you keep kids fit. This is how you get them talking. This is how you meet up with your friends, give kids a bit of independence. And I think all of those things are undervalued. In my day, 75% of kids walk to school. Now it's under 50%. So I think we've got a real task to get our kids walking, to get our parents walking, and to make sure that we talk about the benefits. For every £1 invested in a walking scheme that we run, we deliver £5 in benefits in terms of child activity, congestion reduction, because 1 in 4 cars in the morning peak rush hour is on the school run. We've got to convert that into the school walk, and we've got to get people walking. And I just want to close by saying a couple of other final thoughts. First of all, more cars equals fewer friends. And that's a really profound statement when you think that the number of cars on our road has I think, more than trebled over the last 30 years since 1970. So the more cars that there are, the less likely people are to know their neighbours. And this is research that came out of California, but has also been replicated in Bristol in our own country. And if you think about those high traffic neighbourhoods, they tend to be more atomised. People tend to not know their neighbours. So there's something really interesting about the social life of neighbourhoods and what happens when cars are restricted. Not everyone can still get to their cars and can still drive them for the journeys that they want to drive them, and will still, you know, in some cases will need them for longer journeys, etc. But in terms of more cars equals fewer friends, I think that's something that's quite profound as we look at the epidemic of loneliness and mental health issues that we've seen bubbling up through the COVID isolation. And it's not just the mental health of older people, it's the mental health of younger people. So that's my first point. And the second point is the Committee on Climate Change report on how we get to net zero, how we get that 80% reduction in our baseline 1990 emissions by 2035. And the target of a 9% reduction in vehicle mileage, but a third fewer car journeys. So that shows you that there will still be car journeys, but you can get rid of a third of those journeys and reduce the mileage by 10%. So it shows just how many short journeys are happening. I think we've seen some return to the car as part of the messaging from ministers post-COVID, but we know that what will really change our streets is better access to buses, better access to trams, better access to trains. And for every bus journey, we know there are 17 minutes of walking, whereas we know with every car journey, there's 1 minute of walking, and that's from the house to the garden gate or to the car door. And I think when you hear stats like 1 in 5 people across the country do less than 20 minutes continuous exercise walking a year, not a month, not a week, not a day, a year. It shows just how far we have to go in terms of getting the nation moving, and I hope we can move beyond the current culture wars that we're having on these issues, that we can start listening to each other and working together. And we at Living Streets will be launching our manifestos for the mayoral and the county council elections in the new year, and I hope we'll see many of you on our calls and joining our calls, so that every councillor, every candidate signs up to our ambitious vision of what our cities, our towns and our neighbourhoods can be. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mary. So we've got a few questions. We haven't got an awful lot of time if we're going to keep to the timetable, but we've just put a couple of these questions to you. One from Helen Pitt has come in. We know that Boris Johnson is keen on walking and cycling, so is Andrew Gilligan. Do you get a sense of whether the rest of the Tory party will torpedo their plans? Will Tories in marginal boroughs campaign against LTNs in the May elections next year?
I think it's a mixed picture. I think generally politicians who live in cities of all descriptions, this is not a Labour, Tory, Green, Lib Dem thing, but I think if you tend to be in a city, you tend to have more empathy with those who are on foot and use public transport. And if you're in a sort of shire or a very small town or a county council, there's perhaps a view about looking out from your car windscreen. I think that's a gross generalization, and there are very many exceptions to that. So I would say that this generation of Conservative national politicians are pretty you know, well apprised of the green side of things. I think where, speaking as a former councillor and a former MP, where politicians tend to get a little bit nervous, A, is around election time, and B, is around opposition and petitions and things like that. And I think we've seen schemes being pulled out in some areas, and then the silent majority in favour of them saying, actually, we're not happy with that, no one consulted us. So there's an issue about, you know, who's making the noise? Is the noise genuine, or is it actually some of these machine bots that are also tweeting about Donald Trump, that are also anti-vax, that are also in some cases pro-Brexit? Or are these real people who are trying to have a conversation? And I think there's some sort of cyber skills and cyber learning that we could have in that to sort of basically block and report some of those tweets. I came across one the other night and I was laughing because it done 225,000 tweets in the last 3 years. And by my calculation, that's about 300 tweets a week. And you know, I did some maths and I was thinking, that's hundreds of tweets a week. You know, nobody is doing that. This is just, you can scroll down and you can kind of work out you know, which ones are sort of from the St. Petersburg troll farms. So I'm not sure, and I think in a way it's up to us as campaigners to elevate our voices and to make sure that this big amount of funding, and this is, you know, a really interesting and big improvement in active travel funding that's been announced by the government. Let's not forget that, with an ambition to spend £2 billion over the next 5 years, I think it is a genuine game changer if it's done right. Will they get to £2 billion? I don't know. They're going to need to scale up very, very fast. Do the traffic engineers and the local authorities have the skills to deliver this? That's another question. Are they confident in consultation? That's another question. Are we clear that, you know, not every traffic engineer who is trained in car flow management understands how pedestrians and cyclists move, understands safer crossing, understands safer speeds, understands health outcomes? Do the planners understand how to design? I had estates in Wakefield that didn't have footpaths. You know, how was that meant to work? You know, how can we design for walking and cycling if there's no paths? So there's or the cycle paths are down a sort of dodgy dark alleyway that you wouldn't dream of going up late at night. So there's things like that where it's the whole planning design. It's not just about the traffic engineers, it's about the vision of the city, it's about what good neighbourhoods look like. And with the town centres and the difficulties we're seeing with shops, also making the local economic argument that says you might only be able to have 4 customers inside the shop, but you can have 20 customers seated safely outside your coffee shop, and that keeps 4 people in work over the next year while we all get vaccinated. And there's some really interesting research that we've done on the pedestrian pound. I'm just conscious, communities experience air and noise pollution, more especially boundary roads. How can these residents be included in design? That's a really great question, Emma. And I think that the issue is that what happens generally in the introduction of schemes is that there is sometimes a small increase in traffic on those main roads, but that traffic generally disappears over time as people make the switch to active travel over their for their short journeys, or they tend to go at quieter times, or they tend to do, instead of doing 3 or 4 trips in a day, they'll just do 1 trip. And so behaviours change when these projects happen. And I would like to see, I mean, the air pollution bit, there's a big focus on electric vehicles, but they still produce particulate matter from tyres and brakes. And the heavier the car, the more air pollution they produce. So, and the more damage they do to the roads as well. So in a way, if we're going to look holistically at how we manage our roads and do road upkeep, you would look at lighter, smaller vehicles as well. So I hope I've answered that.
Great, Mary. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you off there from speaking, just so we can stick to our timetable. Thank you very much for a really fascinating presentation and also taking the time over the questions. I don't know if you've got a few moments just to scan through the chat. Maybe you could contribute in there. But yeah, so thank you very much. And we're going to move on now to our next speakers. So next on the agenda, we have Atchara Khonglim and Ellen Holmes. Atchara is a bikeability instructor and one of Cycling UK's 100 of Women in Cycling in 2020. and she will talk to us about setting up a community cycling hub. And in conjunction with that, Ellen Holmes, who is Cycling UK's Development Officer for Greater Manchester, will talk about funding opportunities for groups of that kind. And again, we'll take questions jointly after their presentations. So over to you, Atchara. Can you go off mute, please?
Okay.
Great,
sorry.
thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. I love listening to everything you said. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here, and thank you, Nick, for pronouncing my name correctly. That was brilliant. I wasn't expecting that. So yes, excuse my nervousness. I'm just naturally quite a nervous person anyway. So I'm not sure if I'll fill the 10 minutes time slots, but I'll try my best. So I work as a bikeability instructor for Active Tameside, and that's my main job. I also set up Tameside Women's Community Cycling Group with the help of Ellen, who's been incredibly supportive, and she's been very patient and answered all my questions, and it's given me some of the most amazing advice and held my hands in some very difficult meetings. And I just feel really lucky to have her. Thanks, Ellen. And and we did have some issues at the start of the group. We are quite a new group. The first lockdown, we had to put all our planned sessions on hold, but we used that time during lockdown to build up some following through social medias and concentrate on the risk assessment, how we can carry on once the lockdown has been lifted. So we've done that, and the first session was brilliant. It was great. We had, well, my mistake, I thought we could have more people than we thought, and then I was told I couldn't. That's okay. So if we had gone through with the number of people who was interested, we would have had 50 people on the day. So that was a bit of a setback, but that's okay. So from Ellen, we've met. I was introduced to Louise O'Donnell. I had to. She's one of our founding members. She's incredibly supportive of what we're trying to do, and also Beth from British Cycling. She's been very supportive, and I've done Bree's ride leader course, so I'm really excited about doing that next year. I really don't know why we're so popular. Actually, I'm just going to scroll down on the note that I've made. I think one of the reasons why we are popular in the session is in Tameside there isn't any women learn to ride cycling sessions available, even though we have one of the best cycling facilities, Tameside cycle circuit, which I don't know, I guess some of you might not know, but it's just an amazing traffic-free space for our learners to come and learn how to ride in a traffic-free environment. It's after the first sessions, we've had amazing support from Ursula, who's a great friend of mine from the Bike Hive, which I absolutely love. She's been amazing through the session as well, and from her support I was introduced Team Glow, Glynis and Helen Pidd, who's been absolutely amazing throughout the second and third sessions. Some of the ladies that we've met at the sessions have never ridden a bike before or haven't done so in a long time, and all we've done is basically say, here's a bike, here's a helmet, here's a track, we'll help you to get on your way. And that was all we've done, just through tips and advice and support, and it's just been the most enjoyable experience in my life anyway. And I just want to continue doing what we do and continue cycling onto the roads, and hopefully next year we'll get our hands on the the funding that we're able to secure through the help of Active Tameside, who's been incredibly supportive since lockdown. We've got funding through Sports England. We do have some issues with the banking application at the moment with HSBC. If anyone's got any advice on that, I'd love to hear, but it's been nightmare basically. But anyways, once we've got our hands on that, we'll be going to Trek, who have been in touch and say we'd love to have some bikes and helmets, and I'll tell you more about that next year. But they said yes, okay, excellent, and that's how I met Sarah as well, who's very helpful. I think that's all I can really think of at the moment to share with you. But obviously, there's much more in terms of cycling. I just want to help more women to get into cycling in Tameside and Greater Manchester, and to develop and grow as a group. And hopefully next year we'll have more women who's been coming to our group. We'll teach them how to become cycling instructors, or teach them how to help run the sessions as well, and go out for lots of rides together. So I'm just so excited. I'm actually really nervous about this, but thank you so much for having me here. That's all I have to say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Atchara. So we'll just go straight over to Ellen, and then there are some questions to you already, and then we'll have a little question session. Or if you'd rather do that in the chat, that's fine too.
It's fine. I'm sorry for being so nervous. I'm just a naturally nervous person.
That's okay. Okay, so Ellen, over to you, please. Thanks.
Yeah. So I've got a presentation prepared. I just wanted to on what you said.
You're a little bit quiet. Can you go closer to your microphone?
Yeah, sorry, it's an ongoing issue with my laptop. But yeah, I just wanted to respond to what you said about not really knowing why the sessions are so popular. I think part of it is kind of your enthusiasm. And I remember the first time I met you, I think it was this time last year in December, just before Christmas, and you got the idea of setting up a cycling group for women on your own, and you're asking, do you think this is possible? Is there other ways of doing this? And then a year later, you managed to get so many huge organisations on board backing what you're doing. You managed to get dozens of women in Tameside active and keen to come back again in the new year. So I think, yeah, it's kind of down to yourself and all the work of the group, really. So yeah, it's been a brilliant project to be involved with. So I'll see if I can share my screen. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Can see it.
Yeah, we can see that.
Brilliant. So yeah, I work for Cycling UK. I'm sure many of you may have heard of us as an organisation, as the National Cycling Society. Our main aim is to get more people cycling. I work within the behaviour change and development team, and our main focus is getting non-cyclists cycling, helping beginners and returner cyclists, people who might have cycled as a child and then not cycled for many years, or stopped when they had children, or for whatever reason they've had a break from cycling, get them to fall back in love with it, and also to kind of support groups and individuals who are marginalised and there are barriers to people participating in cycling. So there's two main programmes that I work on within our team. We run them nationally across England and also into Scotland. Within Greater Manchester, there's two main programmes that I'm going to run you through. So the first one is community cycle clubs. But community cycle clubs has our kind of long-term programme, and it's basically like a startup support that we provide to community groups to make cycling a part of what they do, or to help groups develop regular cycling activities. So that could be led rides, learn to ride activity, it could be community bike kitchen, kind of pool clubs. So any kind of activity that gets those kind of people that we're targeting get more involved with cycling. Community cycle clubs isn't necessarily, I'd say kind of like the funding available isn't the main selling point really with community cycle clubs. It's more the in-depth support that we can provide. So the starting funding we can give out to groups is up to £1,500, which can cover, purchasing pool bikes, purchasing tools, putting volunteers on training courses, any kind of basic startup cost to get cycling activity going can be covered by that. But I'd say kind of the training courses and help with recruiting volunteers are the big selling point for community cycle clubs. Here are some photos of some of our fantastic Greater Manchester-based community cycle clubs in action. We're currently working with 9 groups who are affiliated on the programme in the region at the moment, and there's also 2 or 3 who are kind of on the cards for getting registered with us over the new year, including Tameside Women's Community Cycling Group. So the other programme that we run in the region, Big Bike Revival, is more of a kind of short-term events-based programme. So this is slightly more hands-off in terms of the support that we provide to groups. It's kind of, there's a bit more funding available. So the model here is we provide funding to groups to deliver one-off activities or a series of events. In a normal year, we run the programme through spring and summer, which are kind of the friendliest months for beginner cyclists. And we can cover funding for all kinds of events, from bikes, so just turn up and get your bike fixed, to a learn to ride session, a group ride, a family cycling day, any kind of event that will act as a bit of a catalyst to either encourage someone to get the rusty old bike out of the shed, or give cycling a try, or give a new cycle route to their area. A huge host of events that we're kind of looking to support through the model that we use is fix, learn, ride. So either you come along to get your bike fixed, you come along to learn something new about cycling, or you come along to go on a ride. In a normal year, which we're hoping to return to next year, that would be the model. But unfortunately, due to COVID this year, we've had to strip everything back and just deliver bike maintenance and doctor bike activities, partly because the programme's heavily funded by Department for Transport, and that's been one of their requirements, but also partly because that's the safest thing to do at a social distance, whilst we're going in and out of different lockdown measures and different group numbers on rides and all that kind of thing. I think Big Bike Revival, for your average kind of WRGM neighbourhood group, is probably the easiest programme to get involved with off the mark. And I do think getting funding for Big Bike Revival events could be a really good way for you to engage with more people in your local area. So, for example, in Levenshulme, I know there's been a bit of controversy there around active neighbourhoods and some of the infrastructure going in there. I've had a few conversations recently with Andrew Fisher and a few other local campaigners from Levenshulme about getting funding from Dr. Bike.
Ellen, can I just cut in there?
Yeah.
We're losing you again, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
And also the time slot's up. So I think we've got some questions in the chat. It's probably best if if you kind of if you deal with people in writing, because there's just some technical gremlins going on there. We do have a couple of moments for questions for Atchara, if you're willing to take a few questions. You put your mic on, please.
Hi.
So we've got a question from Claire. What, in your experience, have been the main barriers to women cycling? Have there been any surprises, and why did you start the project?
Okay. All right. Surprises. Yes. The fact that it was popular. I was really worried that there would be some backlashes with it being women-only sessions, but I was determined to do it, so I didn't really. That wasn't going to stop me. But no massive clashes at all. If anything, it's been massively popular. And the first sessions, even with 50 people, I think, booked to do the sessions, we had another 20 on the waiting list. So it's no. The only issue I would say is HSBC, but I'm not going to repeat that again. And also, as a bikeability instructor, I've always got that for call functions in my head. So that's how I wanted to deliver sessions. But as a session started, once the ladies were on the bike, they were off, and I wouldn't see them for another 20 minutes. So that wasn't really an issue, but it just meant I had to change how the session starts at the beginning. But it's all been great. What was the other questions? I've just kind of went ahead.
Well, have you? Yeah, I think we've answered those really. So we've got another question here from Helen. Why do you think cycling in particular is so white? Any tips for encouraging more bums on saddles from BAME communities?
I love that question. I actually asked that question myself too, because to be honest, until recently, it wasn't all that white to me, because I started cycling in London. I used to live in Stoke-Newington and worked in Chelsea, which is a 20 miles round trip, and I felt completely happy at home on my bike there. And I moved to Whalley Range and didn't see any issue there too either. It was only when I came to Ashton I realised that it was an issue, to be honest. And I don't think the race, you know, I think it's because parents, we just need to introduce the cycling to everyone, make it more accessible. That's why our sessions is free. One of the reasons I set up the group is if I make it free and make it known to the mums and carers, mum carers, then you know they'll see that cycling is fun, and it won't be something that can be scared of, and yeah, get involved. So that's it. So I don't think it's so.
So I've got a question for you.
Cool.
The people who start cycling with you, how many of them become, I guess, kind of fully fledged commuter or utility cyclists? How many of them actually take their skills onto the road and into their daily lives?
We've only had 3 sessions. So.
Okay.
But the first sessions, well, we've actually got quite a mixed bag of cyclists who's joined us. There's a lady called Rini who's been, she's 86 or 88, I'm not sure. She's had a hip operation and she's been cycling forever. There's one of our most recent learners is Hasina. I had a lovely video to share with you. She came to our last session. She couldn't ride, and she was riding at the end. And there is a lady who actually came on that day. She, an Asian lady who was a little bit more apprehensive about falling, and I think that's what probably held her back. But I think maybe another second session and a third session be fine. The only way that I think to be a confident cyclist is to go riding on the road. I live in Stoke-Newington. I travelled from Essex Road through Islington, Covent Garden, Hyde Park Corner to get to Sloane Square. And believe me, if I can do it, then it's possible with practice. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. We've got any others?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got a question for Ellen about transport hubs, but yeah, as we say, if you could just go in the chat and have a look at that one. And yeah, so just thanks again to Ellen and Atchara for that. Apologies again for the technical gremlins, but I think we did get the message that Cycling UK are willing to support community cycle groups with funding and advice. And the Big Bike Revival is something I'm sure people know about once a year, where you have essentially a big party getting people back onto bikes and fixing them and re-enthusing people. So this brings us to the next part and the next speaker of the evening. So we're very happy to welcome Jon Burke, all the way from Hackney in London. Now, Jon Burke is the Cabinet Member for Energy, Waste, Transport and Public Realm at Hackney Council. He's a vociferous advocate and, more recently, in a very literal sense, defender of low traffic neighbourhoods in the borough. He's going to talk to us about how to deal with pushback and opposition to low traffic neighbourhoods. So over to you, Jon. Let's get your video and your microphone on. Brilliant.
Right then, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
I just got one.
I just got one, yeah. So
I can hear you, Jon.
I think I heard someone from Liverpool there. Is that, no, is that Chris?
I'm just going to heckle.
Okay, so if we've got, in
Me
case we've got any gate crashes in the room this evening, as you can see, I've come dressed as a UKIP councillor this evening to place everyone at ease in my favourite tweed jacket. It's lovely, in fact, to have people from the Wirral and from Hackney in the room this evening, and it was nice to hear someone talk fondly about cycling in Stoke Newington. But if there is anybody kind of in the room that is waiting to hear kind of my grand master plan for removing cars completely from the streets of Hackney and London, I'm afraid they're going to be disappointed. And I think that's kind of one of the myths that's been allowed to grow up around the more recent work on low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets and cycling infrastructure. You know, I've been very clear, and I wrote this recently in an article for Huffington Post on kind of the role that electric vehicles can play in the transport system in the future. You know, I think it's very clear that there will be a role for motor vehicles in industrial societies and in cities into the future. But, you know, I think that it's also equally clear that if we are to address the most pressing political issue, not just of our age, but of any age, you know, kind of rapid human-induced global warming, then we need to rapidly and deeply decarbonize every sector of the economy, and that includes land transport, which represents, you know, by most measures, 21% of all of the UK's emissions. And, you know, it's all the more pressing that we address land transport, because unlike some other sectors, such as the energy sector, which has been kind of rapidly decarbonised in recent years, land transport emissions have been growing very rapidly. Now, I'm sure Chris will touch on, or has in previous meetings touched on, you know, what that looks like in Manchester. But, you know, in 2019, you know, there were 330 million miles more driven on the roads of Manchester than 10 years previously, with all of the associated road danger, which is just a statistical fact from placing more cars on the road, air quality implications and global warming emissions associated with the operation of those vehicles. In London, the situation is even more grave, and the trajectory of the number of miles driven on our roads has been even faster and has been even kind of steeper. You know, since in 2019, there were 3.6 billion miles more driven on the streets of Greater London than in 2009. It took London something in the region of 100 years to get from 0 miles driven by motor vehicles to 20 billion. And then it took London another decade to increase that by 15.5%. And that is simply not sustainable and not compatible with the grave environmental crisis that we face, and the social, economic and public health challenges presented by motor vehicles in the capital. And so, you know, part of the response to the potential for that to be exacerbated even further in a post-COVID world, in Hackney at least, and in other London boroughs and beyond, but in other London boroughs such as Islington, with Rowena Champion, Adam Harrison in Camden, Claire Holland, who some of you will have heard of down in Lambeth, and of course the godfather of low traffic neighbourhoods, Clyde Lokes over in Waltham Forest. You know, all of those boroughs and more have been undertaking the delivery of low traffic neighbourhoods, but other measures such as school streets. Over the past year, I have delivered close to 40 school streets, which is the largest number in the UK, and a key component in how we eliminate that quarter of the morning rush hour that Mary referred to earlier, which is clogging the roads and proving an impediment to blue badge holders, emergency service vehicles and commercial vehicles. You know, that is motor vehicles that are socially useful and really do need to be on the roads. But the crisis is not just a kind of general one in terms of the explosion in miles driven on London's roads. It's actually much more specific than that, because over that 10-year period, the increase in miles driven annually on London's roads has increased kind of 3.6 billion, but on London's residential roads, the increase is 3.9 billion miles. And you sort of think, well, how can that be the case? Someone's got the arithmetic wrong. The reality is that the total net increase in miles driven on London's roads over a decade has been borne not only entirely by residential roads, but over that period, it's abstracted a further 300 million miles from the main road network. In fact, in London since 2006, the number of miles driven on the main road network has fallen by 800 million annually, whilst it's increased by 3.7 billion on residential roads. And, you know, there are multiple reasons for that. You know, the 10-year real terms cut in fuel duty has significantly reduced the marginal cost of operating a motor vehicle, and financing packages have made it easier for people on lower incomes to buy larger cars and more polluting cars that they might not perhaps have been able to afford previously. But I think for me, and I think of course online retail has played a role, though I'd be careful to kind of ascribe it all to online retail, because the growth in the number of miles driven by cars and private hire taxis over the last decade in London has risen at twice the rate of light commercial vehicles. But I think the main factor for me, and again Mary touched on this earlier, is that you know, Silicon Valley billionaires, through the creation of satellite navigation technology and the commodification of the knowledge of our residential streets, have turned all of our neighbourhoods in London and in Hackney into giant bypasses. Now, if I were to go to any constituency outside London and say to people in that town, would you like a giant bypass through the community? Of course, you know, they'd be up in arms about it and would overwhelmingly refuse it outright. You know, but we'd have to go through a protracted process of public consultation. There'd be legal challenges, and in many cases they'd be defeated. What has happened in London in particular, but in other cities too over the last 10 years, is that we've created bypasses through people's communities, and nobody has ever been consulted on that. When was the last time anybody in this room was consulted about the amount of miles driven on their roads? So it rings a little bit hollow, even though in Hackney we are undertaking an extensive consultation exercise around the new low traffic neighbourhoods. It rings a little hollow when people talk about consultation, because the things that we're seeking to retard, nobody consulted any member of the public on before. Nobody consulted all of those parents out there who are terrified to let their kids cycle to school because there are so many cars on the road, and then increasingly so many big cars. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly from the kind of specific point I'm here for, which is to talk about kind of, you know, how we're rolling out low traffic neighbourhoods and how we're dealing with some of the challenges of that. I think the first thing to note is that low traffic neighbourhoods are not a new concept in Hackney or you know, or more broadly across the UK. In fact, we delivered our first low traffic neighbourhood in 1974 in the Beauvoir, and it's one of the best places to cycle in the borough. And like most established low traffic neighbourhoods, if we suggested removing it, local residents would be absolutely up in arms about it. And the literature is clear time and time again that once the settling down period has come into effect, residents on the whole, just like with controlled parking zones, tend to realise the benefits. And if there is some slight disadvantage by adding a few minutes to their journeys here and there, I think for most residents, they realise that the trade-off is much quieter roads, safer roads, and pleasanter places in which to live. And we know from some of the work that Living Streets have undertaken, but work more broadly from TfL, that this doesn't just benefit local residents, it also benefits small businesses. And the more you can encourage people to remain within the locale and to travel within the locale, the more likely they are to avail themselves of those small businesses. And we know cyclists, public transport users and pedestrians spend more on average in their local town and district centres than people who drive do. So it's in the interest of the small business community, which will be struggling in a post-COVID world, to create the opportunities for increased footfall. And we've seen that in places like, you know, Broadway Market, which we pedestrianised earlier this year. And we now have the unenviable task of being complained at every weekend about too many people being down there. You know, not that the businesses are not doing well enough. You know, in the eyes of some, they're doing too well these days. So, you know, they're not a new concept. We've had the first one since 1974. We delivered another bona fide one in the 80s in Brownswood. And Hackney, prior to COVID, had the largest number of modal filters, which most people in this room will be aware of what they are, you know, in the UK, over 120 of them. And we had absolutely no problem with those 120 modal filters with the emergency services. We had no problem with any members of the public complaining they couldn't get where they wanted to go, and we had no residents complaining to us that they wanted those filters pulled out. So I think you know, one of the driving forces behind some of the opposition to the most recent low traffic neighbourhoods is a natural aversion to kind of rapid social change. You know, but that rapid social change, I would argue, is necessary because of the multiple crises we face, and is mandated in a borough like Hackney, where over 81% of voters in 2018 backed political parties that support low traffic neighbourhoods, you know, and it's a borough where 70% of households don't own cars. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we ignore the needs of people who do need to use cars, but as I've made the point earlier, the more measures that we can undertake through, for example, low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets, improve cycling infrastructure, increase bus priority, such as the extension of bus lane hours of operation, the elimination of parking from bus lanes and the creation of bus gates. The more measures such as that we can put in place, the more unnecessary local car journeys we can eliminate, the more the more through traffic we can eliminate. And, you know, 45% of the cars on the streets of Hackney at any one time are passing through the borough without stopping. You know, the more we can discourage that, the more space there will be for the vehicles that need to be there to use those roads. Now, I've seen Nick appear at the top of my screen, which tells me I've already rambled on for a good 10 minutes without touching the sides of what is a really interesting debate. But I'm very happy to take any questions that people have, or continue for any remaining time I've got.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. So I think, yeah, you've got, let me just check, you've got about 7 or 8 minutes to answer questions, so we've got a little bit of time still. I think what's really important and cannot be stressed enough was, you know, you reeling off all those statistics. I think a lot of opponents to improving active travel see traffic as some kind of constant rather than something that's constantly increasing, and if we don't do something about it, you know, if we don't give people alternatives, if we don't enable people to make journeys in a more sustainable and in a way that takes up less space, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's a question of physics, isn't it? The more big objects you have in a finite space, the harder it is for those things to move about. So I think it's absolutely essential to acknowledge that traffic isn't a constant law of nature. It's something that will just increase exponentially unless we do something about it. So that's my 2 pence. We've got some questions in here. Claire asks, have you converted any sceptical political allies? If so, what was the thing that helped you do that?
Well, I think it's kind of too early to tell. I think it's quite tricky because we've gone through COVID. You know, we've been conducting group meetings, you know, via kind of Google Hangouts or, you know, other mechanisms such as Zoom. And as a consequence, we've not been spending time at the town hall together. So there's not been opportunities, I think, to have those conversations with the unaligned that you might have done previously. So I don't think it's that easy to tell at this stage. I think that you know, as a group, we remain, you know, the group remains supportive of the policy position, and we've not had some of the problems that we've had elsewhere in London, such as Ealing in their group, and also I've been conducting, you know, since we developed the emergency transport plan, I took, you know, the ETP to group, when it was approved. I then provided a deadline for written submissions to that, then a further drop in with officers. We've had another drop in with the head of service, and I've produced a weekly update for 3 months. I think on the whole, people who are not there to be convinced on this subject, will only be convinced by the approbation of the public over time. So these schemes have got to kind of work on their own merits in order for people who kind of doubt them on principle to be convinced of their efficacy. And I think Mary kind of made the point earlier that, one of the preoccupations for politicians, which seems perfectly rational, though perhaps I'm kind of a bit of an outlier in this respect, is how things will play at the ballot box. And the overwhelming majority of politicians, though I think motivated by a desire to achieve things for their community, probably didn't put themselves forward to be abused, smeared, attacked, sent death threats on a kind of daily basis. And that's not for everyone. And in a functional democracy, it shouldn't be for everyone. But I do think there's a big element of councillors in London supporting improvements tacitly, but not necessarily being willing to put their heads above the parapet, because it's a pretty toxic atmosphere out there. It's nice to be back in the north this evening, and I'm sure my detractors will be delighted too, because they never cease to spend any time telling me to go back to Liverpool because I don't belong in Hackney. And that's kind of been an element, I think, of some of the debate that even I found a bit shocking. The kind of London nativism that's come out of some of the opponents has been kind of has been a bit dispiriting, but that's the only part of it that really has been. I expected people to push back because this is a big change for people, and what we've had in terms of the operation of the road network is kind of unabated growth of vehicle usage. A doubling of the number of cars on our roads in less than 30 years, and nobody has said to drivers before, you can't go down there or do that thing that you really want to do on the whole. And so whilst I think a lot of the opposition is a response to rapid social change, I think it's also about the fact that fundamentally people know that this is an exercise in fair distribution of the road transport network. And as a socialist, I've got long-standing experience of the reaction of people who've got stuff to having that stuff taken away from them and given to other people. This is a redistributive process, and redistribution is painful for the people who've got stuff. But I think on the whole, it's beneficial for the people who haven't. And I think more people will benefit from low traffic neighbourhoods than will lose out.
Right. So a question it's already come up once this evening, but it's come up again. It'd be interesting to hear your experience on it. And that is this idea of displacement of traffic. I think it comes down again to this idea that traffic will stay the same in volume, but that means that the places that drivers can't go down because of the filters end up clogged up even more. What's your experience of that?
Okay, brilliant question, and I think it's a really important one. So I want to be very clear, right, that there is no mechanism through which residential roads displace traffic onto the main road network. Now, the main road network is built literally to carry through traffic, right, from one place to another, right. What has happened in London, as I noted earlier, is through the creation of satellite navigation technology and wayfinding apps, but also through the natural pressure of an overloaded main road network in the capital, as the number of cars have grown and the number of miles driven have grown, is displacement into our neighbourhoods. The amount of miles driven annually on the main roads of London have fallen by 800 million in 14 years, and they've increased by 3.7 billion on our residential roads. Residential roads do not displace traffic onto the main road network. Main roads displace traffic onto the residential road network. And what we experience when local authorities say enough is enough, we are no longer going to allow Silicon Valley billionaires to commodify our roads for the benefit of individual drivers and for the chief executive and the non-executive directors of Google, right, is that you see some of the cars that should have otherwise always been on the main road network, on that main road network. Now, I'm not saying to the people who live along the main road network that's kind of, you know, tough cheese, and they've just kind of suck it up. But and I've been very clear about this, the only way you will address, okay, let me dial back a sec. There's two main ways in which you can address that overloaded main road network, right? One is to open up all elements of every neighbourhood and allow that extensive displacement that we've experienced to happen. Now, we tried that and it failed miserably. It didn't solve air pollution. It didn't solve congestion. It didn't solve road safety problems. And in the fullness of time, as people will know in this room, the law of induced demand means that not only will all the main roads fill up, all the residential roads will fill up too. And so by opening up our neighbourhoods to cars, to the unabated access of cars, all we do is kick the can down the road to the point at which we decide, actually, we do need some policies to address this, some demand side policies, or we need some double-decker roads. Now, I joked recently that people who are, you know, very fanatical about car usage would advocate double-decker roads before they advocated demand side measures to address the excessive number of cars on the road. And then I saw the plans for the Hammersmith Bridge, which does involve a double-decker road, much to my absolute horror. You know, but the other alternative, if we're not going to go down that route, is demand-side policy. Low-traffic neighbourhoods represent one element of that. They're there to protect our communities from through traffic, and we also then need very specific targeted demand-side policies for the main road network. Now, a lot of drivers don't want to hear the fact that you know, there's a limited supply of road space, and if they want to access it in a way that allows them to get from A to B relatively quickly when they use the roads, that we're going to need to ration that road space either through a price signal, through road user pricing, or through giving people an allocation of miles they can drive on the main road network every year. I suspect in the market society in which we live, people will be more likely to opt for road user pricing, and this was recommended by the London Assembly's Transport Committee through its excellent report, London Stalling. You'll see the pun there. They're often pun-based titles for these reports. So, you know, back in 2017, it was clear that the fundamental cause of congestion on London's roads is an excessive number of miles being driven on them. And we know it's not low traffic neighbourhoods because the average bus speed in London has been falling for a decade, long before many of the new low traffic neighbourhoods, which even now only represent a tiny minority of the local road transport network in London, ever arrived. So, you know, in my view, the answer is clear. Whilst we do need good cycling infrastructure and, you know, the kind of cycle lessons that are kind of, you know, converting people locally in Hackney, we do need good storage. We do need things like the Delph cycle plan to get us where we need to be. There is no route to reducing the volume of vehicles on our roads and the amount of miles that are driving that does not involve demand-side measures to retard the use of those vehicles. And so we need low traffic neighbourhoods for the neighbourhoods, and we need road user pricing or some similar mechanism to ration demand for you know, an overloaded main road network. Now, people might say, oh, we don't like the idea of that, but it wasn't local authorities that presided over the doubling of cars on our roads in less than 3 decades, and it wasn't local authorities that froze fuel duty for a decade, which effectively represents a big cut in the cost of operating a motor vehicle. But it is local authorities and councillors like me, who are full council, have members of the public come to them, deputations, and they say, my children are not safe on the streets of this borough, right? My children are not safe in their yards when they're breathing in particulate matter from the cars that you're allowing to dominate our roads, right? And you know, my children's future is not safe from the absolutely exponential rise in land transport emissions that have been allowed to occur in this country. What are you, Councillor Burke, going to do about it? No one goes to Grant Shapps and says that. Grant Shapps is all right taking a few soft-soap questions in the Commons, but he hasn't got to look in the eyes of a mother and tell them they're going to do something about the fact that the roads aren't safe enough for their children. So councillors didn't create this problem, but we've been left with the unenviable task of addressing it. And you know, that's made us a lot of enemies, and it's made me in particular probably a disproportionate amount of enemies. for a variety of reasons, one of which I'm working class and therefore I'm not supposed to ride a bike. Car drivers keep telling me. The other reason is I can't be bullied, and I come armed with the facts to the arguments that I make. And as a result, you know, I'm told there are whole Facebook forums, which fortunately I'm not on, dedicated to kind of studying the minutiae of my Twitter posts, but I'm not going to be cowed, you know, in whatever occupation I'm in, whether I'm a councillor or whatever I do in the future, you know, by a group of people who've come together to retain the status quo for their own individual benefit. We're going to have to learn to get along in a world of fewer cars that benefit society more generally, rather than a small number of individuals. But, you know, that isn't a car-free world. They still represent an important part of the transport mix.
Great, Jon, I'm afraid we could listen to you all night, but we do have limited time. Thank you very much for that. If you look in the chat, you've generally, people are asking how we give a standing ovation on Zoom. I think you've made a great impression here. So thanks again for joining.
Happy to come back at some point if you can bear me.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think we'd enjoy that. So again, just because time's pressing on a little bit, if we can move over to Chris Boardman for a roundup of what's happened in his world since we last met in September. Okay, over to you, Chris.
Good evening. I knew Jon would do that, actually. I've had a phone call with him, and I actually worked out halfway through he doesn't actually breathe, which is amazing. But so many well encapsulated points that we need that, and we need people like that. There's not many around. I think I worked it out, it's about 1.7 billion extra miles being driven around homes in Greater Manchester. That's a 44% increase, I think it is, in 10 years. And that's what I'm outraged about, actually, not a modal filter. I'm outraged that that's been done without consultation. And I'm outraged that we have to fight for it to get it back. Anyway, I thought this was going to be really quick, but there is actually tons of stuff to tell you. So I'm going to batter through it as quickly as I can. Probably only take 2 or 3 minutes, but there's a lot. So you're going to have to try and keep up. Real success stories, I think, with Tranche 1. I know it was messy. It was messy all over the country, but we did get some real success stories with the Active Travel Fund Tranche 1. Some of that infrastructure is now going to be made permanent because it was done. Northern Quarter particularly, at last, absolutely brilliant. Businesses there are really happy with it as well. Deansgate, more on that in a moment. That's had a little bit of a hiccup, but only a hiccup. The Tranche 2 funds that just been announced, we got £19 million for those active travel measures, those extra funds. That's the largest figure outside of London, and we got more than we asked for. I'm going to talk about in the next few days, or rather the districts will, what they're going to be doing with that. But a lot of them are going to be made permanent. So those announcements are just coming up shortly. So that extra £2 million that we've got, it's a fantastic problem to have, actually, getting more than you actually asked for. So, and I think it shows national government that they've got confidence now in Greater Manchester's, both their ambition and the fact that we've spent 2 years ramping up, getting ready to deliver. We've got 10 times more people working on this now than we did 2 years ago, which is brilliant, and it's starting to come to fruition. So that slog's happened, and it starts to be talked about 2021 as the year of delivery, because that's what it looks like it's going to be. 55 miles of schemes will be delivered, worth around £85 million by next Christmas, this time next year. It's not the amount that we need it much faster, but it's still a pretty bloody healthy chunk. So I'm pleased we're off at last and talking about tangible stuff. Talking about tangible, Chorlton Area 3's consultation is now live. Work's beginning on that imminently on Area 2. Should be complete by spring. Oldham are on site with the 2 bridge upgrades around King Street and Union Street West near Oldham Town Centre. Completion on that is expected in early 21. Manchester's Beswick Crossing package now has full business case approval, so that's cracking on. Rochdale Castleton scheme expected to go out to consultation at last. So real moves in Rochdale. There's some good people embedded in that system, and I think a little bit of publicity's really helped them along. Stockport ramping up delivery with their schemes on site, including the UK's first parallel signalised crossing in Gilbert Road. And that was allowed, DFT allowed us to fiddle around with the use of zigzags for that one. So it's a bit of another Manchester first. And that crossing sort of replaces an existing puffing crossing, but provides new segregated signalised crossing. The other Stockport scheme on site is Bramall Park and the Heaton's Cycle Link. A further 2 Stockport schemes are expected to be on site this month on the A6. They're the links. It's a kind of a multi-user path on the Manchester Airport Relief Road, plus the Offerton to Stockport route. Manchester's northern quarter I mentioned earlier, Thomas Street and Ducey Street, those trial closures to vehicles because of the active travel fund, they're now proposed to be permanent, which is brilliant. And Deansgate, they are looking to make a big chunk of that permanent, so big steps forward there. They are going to open it temporarily for a bus route, but only temporarily. In Wigan, they're about to go to consultation. In fact, I think they might have already gone to consultation on the Wigan Pier scheme, that segregated route that connects the town centre. Tameside, they're in the process of putting in a temporary lane along the A635. Salford, full approval granted for their Swinton Greenway, which is really nice. I had a good look at that at the October GMCA meeting, so that's on the horizon. Salford's been very active in the active travel fund schemes, with a number of road reallocation schemes on their books too. Cyclops junctions, we all have come to love those. Royce Road one is obviously in, it's working well, and it's already received an award from Brake. Bolton's is following shortly. They hope to complete theirs in January, and Borough will be starting work on their first Cyclops, which will be near the town centre early next year. Salford's on site in the new year on the Trafford Road scheme, and that's going to include 6 Cyclops junctions, which is pretty cool. We've had inquiries about this design all around the country. Lancashire, Cambridge. Cambridge are obviously now building one as well as we speak. Liverpool, St Helens, Cardiff. But what I think is pretty cool is we've got inquiries from around the world. We've had inquiries from Bern in Switzerland, Michigan, Ottawa, Dublin. So that's quite nice to be involved in something. So hats off to the TFGM team who came up with that design. So active neighbourhood's been a lot about that in the chat, and obviously John's just been telling us about his experience. So we're supporting Manchester City Council, who generally want to deliver a good scheme, particularly in Levensham. I've been watching the chat on that. We've got to see the results of the consultation, which have just closed, but we will have our input to make sure that it is the design quality is high. As people here know, that's my job. I don't have control of the roads, but I have control of the rules and the cash, and we don't fund anything that won't work. So I've got high hopes for that one. So that consultation, as I said, it just closed. Trafford's and Urmston's consultation is now live. Bury are progressing a small active neighbourhood scheme in the Garside Hay area, and that's going to be complete in January. Salford's, I think it's Aldsall's active neighbourhood, that's out for consultation at the moment. TFGM's active neighbourhood project, which is managed by Sustrans and Arup, that's going well. 2 consultations, Stockport and Bury, due to go live very soon. There should be around 30 active neighbourhoods up and running next year. So John's just alluded to, you know, there's been some pretty spun press out recently. They've suddenly become a battleground, active neighbourhoods, to actually keep the traffic on them, which is pretty crazy state of affairs. Imagine looking on the human species from the outside and trying to understand this one. To counteract that, but I think more to help people understand, really, we're going to show as many positive stories from people who've already live and already love living on filtered neighbourhoods, whether they know it as an active neighbourhood or not. Most, of course, won't. It's just normal for them. It's a cul-de-sac and you can't drive down that road. So we're doing some work on that right now. There are hundreds of existing modal filters and low traffic neighbourhoods already in Greater Manchester. I've noticed on Twitter that Graham Cooper, aka Bicycle Riding Motorist, has been getting stuck into that. I saw his map this morning, as I was browsing social media, identifying modal filters in Bolton. Fantastic piece of work, really helpful there. And you start to see, actually, we make those cycle friendly and we start to join them up, we're already there. So that was really helpful. So a bit of a call to action, please. If anyone in any other district can help us identify these, please do. And get in touch. Kirsty's email address is going to go in the chat. I think Claire's going to put that up. Better still, if you know someone who already lives on those streets that don't allow through traffic, ask them to get in touch with Kirsty to be interviewed, because we want to tell those stories as well. I'm nearly at the end now. Bike hire, just to say that we've got 4 tenders now that we're in the process of reviewing, really strong international suppliers. And they are about 1,000 pages for them to wade through. So that's looking good. Side roads study, that too is back on track after COVID. A lot of more news to come on that in January. And we'll have a website, so I don't have to do this again, that will host all of this information by the end of January, from schemes, imagery, stories, everything else. We need a bit of help with testing on that. Not necessarily from you guys, you know all about it, those support's good. So if anyone can think of some GM-based friends or family that aren't particularly engaged with cycling and walking yet, get in touch with Kirsty and the comms team, and she wants to make sure that this site works for them. The end. There you go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. We haven't got an awful lot of time for questions, but I think
no, I know.
Just kind of pulling things together that have kind of come out in the chat this evening, and that's in terms of monitoring, feedback, reacting to residents. What just very briefly, how is that going to work going forward? Because I know it's a stipulation, isn't it, in the kind of tranche 2 active travel fund of this kind of ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, consultation is great. If I understand the question, but consultation is great. We have no problem with that, but we need to understand that it's not a referendum. It's not a case of, oh, 51% of people said they didn't like it, so it's done. It's not that. It's a consultation. This is going to be a neighbourhood that's more about people now. We've got too many cars in this area. Tell us how you think we should do that best. And I think that's the way to do it. It's really important here, because this isn't a problem that can go away. It's health, it's climate change, it's all of these huge things. We don't have a choice. We cannot actually continue as it is. So the consultation, and the Grant Chap's made that clear in his letter, that this is to make sure that you've heard the right views, not to give a minority the say in what happens.
Okay, so we're just slightly past 8 now, so it's just for me to wind up. Many thanks to all of our speakers. I hope it was interesting and engaging for all our attendees. We've had people explain things across the active travel spectrum, from living streets, interested in pedestrian matters, getting people onto bikes. John down in London, who's making real inroads, excuse the pun, with people centred streets, and of course Chris Boardman, who's doing the same up here in Greater Manchester. So our next meeting will be in March. We don't know the exact date or indeed the format, so just watch the usual channels to see when that will be. So thanks again for attending. Thanks to all the speakers, and have a great festive break, and see you all soon.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me, everyone.